tonight.
We took out those terrorists like your football team would have taken out those terrorists.
The president touting the U.S. killing of Iran's top military leader. This is the Pentagon reports U.S. casualties in the Iranian counterattack on U.S. troops in Iraq. And
but you got a good one now.
The president yucks it up.
Even though they're trying to impeach the son of a
joking about his own impeachment with the trial in the Senate looming on the Hill. Plus,
they're coming to intimidate and to cause harm.
Virginia declares a state of emergency ahead of a gun rights rally planned at the state capitol. And a judge blocks a presidential order over refugees. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. U.S. casualties in Iraq. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Jenna Browder.
And I'm John Jessup. New details tonight on that retaliatory strike by Iran earlier this month.
It turns out U.S. troops were injured when Iran launched missiles targeting U.S. troops in Iraq.
CBN White House correspondent Ben Kennedy joins us now. Ben, how is the Trump administration explaining the about-face?
Well, John and Jenna, it is true no one died in the strike, but now the Pentagon says 11 Americans did get hurt. Nearly a dozen U.S. service members were evacuated from Iraq following Iran's strike on U.S. bases. The troops were sent to medical facilities in Germany after showing signs of traumatic brain injury and concussions. This news contradicts President Trump's earlier remarks.
No Americans were harmed in last night's attack by the Iranian regime. We suffered no casualties.
Fast forward to today's comments while hosting the 2019 college football champs. Trump compared their victory to the U.S. drone strike that took out top Iranian commander Soleimani.
We took out those terrorists like your football team would have taken out those terrorists.
Iran's supreme leader called President Trump a clown, claiming their retaliatory attack dealt a blow to America's image as a global superpower.
President Trump is standing up to them in ways that have no historic precedent. The regime doesn't like it, and so we're not surprised to see the threats that the supreme leader makes.
Following the attack, the U.S. slapped economic sanctions on the regime.
The sanctions we have imposed are the toughest ever. They are making an enormous difference, and the Iranian people are rightly blaming their own government for 40 years of corruption, mismanagement, and kleptocracy.
The White House is now calling on all nations to join the U.S. with sanctions against Iran over human rights violations.
We have succeeded in raising the costs for Iran, and the regime is badly managing an economic crisis of its own making.
Now, the State Department also announced new sanctions against IRGC General Hassan Savapour. They say he committed human rights violations against protesters and even oversaw the massacre of 148 Iranians last November. John, Jenna?
All right, Ben Kennedy at the White House, thank you. Meanwhile, Virginia is in a state of emergency as the Commonwealth prepares for a gun rights rally in Richmond. Virginia's Democratic governor is temporarily banning firearms on the grounds of the Capitol ahead of the planned protest against new gun control measures. Those measures include restricting monthly gun purchases, expanding background checks, and allowing for the prohibition of firearms in certain areas. Protesters call the measure an assault on the Second Amendment. Ahead of the rally in Richmond, the FBI arrested 3 suspected neo-Nazis, and officials are on heightened alert, increasing security measures around the Capitol. The pro-gun rally comes as cities and towns across Virginia declare themselves sanctuary cities for the Second Amendment.
And back here in Washington, lawmakers and really everyone's eyes are turning to next week's Senate impeachment trial. Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts and the Senate jury are officially sworn in, with one final break this weekend before returning to 6-day work weeks until the mandatory Senate impeachment trial concludes. As CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson reports, both sides are gearing up for the trial of the decade.
Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is coming out the gate swinging, announcing Thursday plans to call for a vote on witnesses when the trial is back in session Tuesday.
We don't even know what the evidence will be. It could be exculpatory, it could be further incriminating. We don't know. but we want the truth.
Democrats want to subpoena 4 witnesses, but Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell disagrees and prefers to hold off on the vote until after each side presents their case.
Obviously, that is the most contentious part of one of these proceedings, and that'll be addressed at that time.
Moderate Republican Senator Susan Collins said in a statement she's likely to support a motion to call witnesses, but not until she hears the arguments. If 3 other Republican senators agree, the Senate will be forced to subpoena witnesses.
At this stage, I'd like to hear from John Bolton and other witnesses with direct information.
Democrats believe new allegations from Lev Parnas strengthen their calls for witnesses and documents.
An associate of the president's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, gave an astonishing interview on national television that further implicated the president in a plot to remove the U.S. ambassador and pressure Ukrainian President Zelensky into announcing investigations into one of the president's leading rivals.
But Republicans question Parnas' credibility.
None of us really have any background on him. He's currently under indictment, currently for election fraud, and so what we don't know is what kind of plea agreement he has to try to get immunity based on what he says now.
President Trump maintains the impeachment trial is a hoax.
They have a hoax going on over there. Let's take care of it.
The White House plans to include the ACLJ's Jay Sekulow in their legal defense team, as well as other notable names like Ken Starr and Robert Ray. Back to you, John and Jenna.
Abigail Robertson on The Hill, thank you very much. And here now for more, Julia Manchester with The Hill. Julia, good to have you. Happy Friday.
Thank you for having me. Happy Friday.
So the White House is gearing up for the Senate trial. What do you make of the legal team it's put together?
Right. So I think these 3 men, including Alan Dershowitz and Ken Starr, have obviously lengthy legal careers, but they also have a television resume, which is something that President Trump definitely likes. He is known to pick people in his administration who have media experience, especially television experience. Ken Starr, in particular, is very interesting. Actually, there was some unearthed footage from 1999 which showed President Trump commenting on Ken Starr, and he was really ripping into him in a Today Show interview and criticizing him. So clearly, over 20 years later, things have changed, but it's interesting.
Time certainly changes things. In this crazy news world in which we live with the crazy news cycles, it's easy to lose sight of what's really happening. So, of course, we have impeachment, but then you also have the bipartisan Senate agreement to the USMCA and the U.S.-China trade deal. A lot going on.
A lot going on, and I think the White House and the Trump campaign are really trying to push these agreements on China trade as well as USMCA, and they're pushing this in particular because they're tied to the economy. President Trump has long touted economic growth in his administration. We know that presidents who have very much campaigned on economic growth have traditionally won their elections and have been successful. But it was interesting. Yesterday, the Trump campaign, and what has, they've been revving up their attacks on Bernie Sanders since Bernie Sanders has been going up in the polls. They attacked Bernie Sanders for voting against USMCA. So it was very interesting how they really took aim at him, and I think it shows that there could be an economic battle brewing between these 2 men.
Well, let's talk about 2020, and on the topic of Bernie Sanders, do you think, Julia, we'll be talking about impeachment by the time November rolls around?
That's a good question. It's interesting, Jenna. I've been looking into how impeachment will impact senators who are facing very tough re-election bids, such as Susan Collins. And it's interesting, in Susan Collins' case, Democrats are very much attacking her for impeachment and comparing her comments now to her comments she made in 1999, especially with witnesses and such. However, Republicans are saying impeachment just isn't on the forefront of voters' minds. At the end of the day, they're going to vote on issues like healthcare and the economy. However, for Susan Collins in particular, there's been these major decisions, such as her decision to vote in support of Brett Kavanaugh for the Supreme Court, potentially this impeachment trial, as well as her vote to not go with Republicans to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act in 2017. So definitely, I think that it's kind of snowballing for her, and impeachment is one of those issues. But I think by November, it's hard for me to believe we'll still be talking about this.
Julia, on the issue of abortion this week, the pro-life group Susan B. Anthony List announced its $52 million campaign to support President Trump's re-election and Republican candidates. Planned Parenthood is out saying that they're going to give $45 million to pro-choice candidates. How big is abortion going to play into 2020?
I think it could play very big into 2020. You know, I think President Trump is someone who has very much embraced the pro-life movement and allied himself with that movement, especially Vice President Mike Pence, because we know Mike Pence has been very consistent on the issue of abortion and pro-life or pro-choice. But for Democrats, they're going to be pushing this in particular as well. They are very much their party is going in a very progressive direction where it's very important to be pro-choice. And if there is a Democratic woman on that ticket, you can bet that that will be an issue for them.
Just a few seconds left here, but Julia, 2020 and the Democratic candidates and the royal family. You wrote about it this week.
Yes.
What are some of them saying about Meghan and Harry and all of this drama?
So the only one we've heard officially from is Pete Buttigieg. And yesterday in Iowa, he essentially used it as a bit of a hook. He said to really promote the American government system and how other countries have had all these scandals and, you know, with royal families and dynasties and such, but America has been Democratic since the start. But he used that as a bit of a hook. Right. I don't know how much we'll hear more about this, but we heard President Trump also comment on it. He seemed to be in support of the Queen on this one, but we'll have to see.
Royalty, it's what makes us different.
Right.
Julia, thank you so much for being with us.
Well, coming up, a federal judge blocking a White House executive order over refugees. Why that matters after the break.
Come home to the sounds of Southern Gospel from CBN Radio. You'll enjoy a rich Southern blend of bluegrass, classic gospel, and Southern gospel favorites like the Gaithers, the Crab Family, and bluegrass sounds like Mountain Faith. So make yourself at home with the all-new CBN Southern Gospel, now available at cbnradio.com.
Meet the pastors who are preaching the gospel in a fresh, fearless way. I'm Roberto Torres-Cedillo. Join me each week for Next Gen Voices. And watch God transform a generation.
Prophecy thousands of years old.
We were called to be a light to the world.
Being fulfilled today. Discover how. Get to life. Call 1-800-700-7000.
We consider it our duty to reach out and help others around the world.
For a gift of $10 or more, you can own the acclaimed CBN documentary To Life. Just call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
To treat a human, no matter what he is, which religious he has, which color he is. This is what I'm doing.
See how the people of Israel are fulfilling prophecy.
History is being written, and I want to be a part of it.
By sharing their knowledge.
In Africa, in Asia, in South America, in East Europe.
And their love.
This is how we work. This is us.
Get to life. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
Well, just days after a volcanic eruption, tens of thousands are preparing for another big one.
You can see this is like a ghost town now because most of the residents here have been forcibly evacuated.
More than 120,000 people have fled Batangas province, some 40 miles south of the capital, Manila. Officials are now warning the Taal volcano could see a bigger eruption at any moment. CBN's Operation Blessing teams in the Philippines working around the clock since the volcano erupted and providing much-needed relief supplies like water, mats, hygiene products, food packets, and masks. To date, Operation Blessing has helped more than 1,000 families.
And back here at home, a federal judge is putting a stop to a presidential order. This week, a Maryland judge issued an injunction against the president's executive order, allowing state and local officials to reject refugees. The preliminary block comes after a group of national resettlement agencies sued the White House. They say the executive order gives local leaders a veto on refugee resettlement and that it conflicts with the 1980 Refugee Act. And U.S. District Judge Peter Misite wrote in his 31-page ruling that refugee settlement activity should go forward as it developed for almost 40 years before the executive order was announced. The block comes as Texas Governor Greg Abbott said in a letter that Texas has been left by Congress to deal with disproportionate migration issues resulting from a broken federal immigration system. Texas took in more refugees in 2018 than any other state and is the first to reject new refugees.
And joining us now is Matthew Sorens, the U.S. Director of Church Mobilization for World Relief, a Christian organization committed to global humanitarian relief and development. Matthew, thanks for being with us. Right off the bat, World Relief had concerns about this executive order from the very beginning. Talk about those concerns and whether this ruling effectively addresses them.
Yeah, our concerns, because we do resettle refugees in partnership with the State Department in about 15 to 20 locations around the U.S., including in Texas, out of Fort Worth. We've been partnering with local churches there in northern Texas to welcome refugee families since 1980. And our concern was that if a governor like the governor there in Texas makes the decision to effectively veto refugee resettlement for the state, that would effectively end not our ministry. We'd still be there ministering to other immigrants and to refugees already resettled, but certainly the longstanding ministry of welcoming refugees at the airport alongside local churches. So we were really pleased by this injunction. It's not a final decision from the judge, but it's at least on a temporary basis means that we'll be able to continue our ministry there in Texas and throughout the country.
Matthew, World Relief's president says, and this is a quote, decisions about the federal refugee resettlement program should ultimately be made at the federal level. Does that leave out state and local authorities?
Well, since at least 1986, settlement agencies have had a formal process of consultation with state and local governments. So we interact really closely with state and local governments. And I think it's worth noting, even, for example, in Fort Worth, the mayor there in Fort Worth, who's a Republican, just like the governor, has been really supportive of taking refugees and very outspoken. But the state governor's decision could effectively limit the ability of a community that wants to continue to receive refugees. But the reality is, even had this executive order gone into effect, or if it does eventually go into effect, if a court would make a different decision, the courts have ruled for a long time that immigration is a federal question. That is to say, we can't have a different immigration policy for Texas than we have for Oklahoma. And if refugees are not allowed to be resettled into Texas, they might be resettled into Oklahoma, and they'll probably move very quickly if they have, for example, a sibling or another loved one in Texas. The challenge there is where effectively would be making people choose between landing with their family, which is what most of us would want to do if we had to go to a new country, or having the support of a resettlement agency to help them quickly get a job, to learn English, to adjust culturally. And we don't think that's actually ultimately in the community's interest to make people choose between those two options of their family and the support of a faith-based resettlement agency like World Relief.
Matthew, in the last few seconds that we have, speaking of Texas, what about some of the concerns of states like the Lone Star State that say they're facing more refugees than they can possibly handle?
I mean, the reality is Texas has one of the lowest unemployment rates in the country, which is a credit to Governor Abbott, I think, and to other leadership. But most business leaders in Texas will tell you they need these work-authorized, lawfully present immigrants as a part of their state. They're playing a huge part of the economic vitality of Texas. And for a lot of local churches, they're key parts of the church, too. The majority of refugees resettled in Texas are actually Christians. Many of them are from Burma or Myanmar, and they're persecuted Christians. And we don't think we should be turning our back on them.
Yeah. All right, Matthew Sorens with World Relief, thank you so much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
When we come back, why a new book co-authored by the other Pope is stirring up a controversy in the Catholic Church.
Too often, we carry baggage from our past. You know what it's like. It affects everything and everyone in our lives. It's always there, weighing us down and keeping us from achieving true happiness. But do you know God never meant for us to be trapped in the past? You can be free of your baggage. Learn how God's forgiveness leads to changed lives and new beginnings. Call the 700 Club.
I'm Ephraim Graham, and this is Studio 5. Cruise with me as I discover the good things happening in the world of music, sports, television, and movies.
The fact that Ryan Coogler was going to be directing the film, I knew that something special was going to happen.
We'll chat with artists at the forefront of entertainment and explore the connection between popular culture and faith.
I asked my pastor, I said, well, does that mean I'm supposed to be a preacher? He says, well, no, you already have a pulpit.
Watch Studio 5, Wednesday night at 9:30.
Tikkun Olam.
This is our nature as a country.
To make the world a better place.
Literally, we felt the earth shaking.
The Christian Broadcasting Network presents To Life, how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
This film needs to be seen by everyone.
I was in tears.
Now you can own the inspiring documentary To Life on DVD.
There is blood on our hands if we know and we walk away.
I'm so grateful that this film was made.
To Life can be yours for a gift of $10 or more. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to CBN.com.
We know that every minute counts to save life.
It'll bless Israel, but it'll also bless all the friends of Israel.
Discover the untold story of how Israeli volunteers are making the world a better place. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to CBN.com to get your copy today.
What's being called a tale of two popes is causing quite a rift in the Catholic Church.
It centers on Pope Benedict XVI's resignation back in 2013, the first pope to resign in nearly 600 years. The Pope Emeritus, as he's now known, has largely kept quiet in the shadows of the Vatican. Now, Benedict's name, since removed on a book defending celibacy for Catholic priests, has put the former pope back in the spotlight. The book, which reaffirms the necessity of a celibate priesthood, comes as Benedict's successor, Francis, prepares to weigh in on the issue. Pope Francis is considering whether to allow married men to be ordained in remote areas of the Amazon where there is a severe shortage of Catholic priests. Critics call the proposed loophole, endorsed at the Vatican conference last year, a slippery slope. Father Carter Griffin is a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington and the rector of St. John Paul II Seminary in Washington. He is also the author of a book called Why Celibacy? Reclaiming the Fatherhood of the Priest. Father, thanks for being with us.
It's a joy. Thank you.
Hey, good to have you. You know, Father Griffin, you wrote the book on priestly celibacy in the Catholic Church. For people who are not Catholic, explain why priests are celibate.
Well, I think it really begins with our understanding of the priesthood, which is one that is a kind of a complete life of giving service to our people, a way of living spiritual fatherhood, and a way of and sort of seeing ourselves as being espoused to the church. And so, given all of that, and the example, of course, of our Lord in his celibacy, St. Paul, St. John the Baptist, and many others, we just sort of see this as something that's very fitting for the priesthood. There are, in fact, some married priests out there in the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Rites, and even some Latin Rite Catholics, former Anglicans and so forth. So there are some married, so it's not something that's essential with the priesthood, but I think we would see it as something that's sort of normative for the priesthood.
Has this issue put Benedict at odds with his successor, Pope Francis? And what about that conference in October that seemed to endorse the provision to allow married men in the Amazon? How does this all play into it?
Yeah, so especially with the movie, you know, The Two Popes that's out now, and everyone's watching this, there's a lot of sort of drama, I think, being read into this. I mean, there's only one Pope, it's Pope Francis. The Pope Emeritus is Emeritus. And yet, obviously, as a former Pope, there's a certain stature that he has in the weight of his words. So I think there may be a tendency to sort of see this as in some way in contrast to Pope Francis. But the fact is that Pope Francis himself has come out very strongly in favor of priestly celibacy and not wanting to make some kind of optional celibacy. The question in the Amazon Synod, which happened in October, suggested, and it only makes recommendations to the Pope. So in fact, he's writing a document that will be coming out in the next month or so, which will actually implement what he would like to implement from the Synod. But it did make the recommendations that there can be some cases, like in the Amazon, where you'd have viri probati, proven men, in this case probably permanent deacons, who could be ordained to the priesthood, who are married. So that may or may not happen, but it wouldn't necessarily be a sort of a widespread change to the practice in the church.
Benedict said he would live, quote, hidden from the world when he retired. Father Griffin, how significant is it that the retired Pope seems to be breaking his silence here?
Yeah, so that was about 6 years ago, you know, and he has had a really low profile for 6 years. And I guess what I would just take away from that is just to sort of see this. I mean, the title of the book in English is From the Depths of Our Hearts. You know, it's written by him and by Cardinal Sarah. And I think that would be the sort of the key to understanding it, is that it's something that he feels so strongly about, that even though there is the risk of this appearing to be in some way in contrast to his successor, which I don't think it is, But nonetheless, he sort of feels so strongly about the importance of this aspect of priestly life that he penned the document. So from the depths of our hearts, I think is the way to see it. It's that it's something so important that he felt that he really had to speak out.
Father Griffin, we only have about a half-minute left, and I apologize because this is a tough question, but
Sure.
people often make the connection between celibacy and the sexual abuse that seems so rampant in the Catholic Church. Is there a connection?
You know, I sort of see that as, I mean, the sexual abuse that happens in the Catholic Church is because of infidelity, you know, and not celibacy. There are a lot of people out there who are not married, who are not sexual abusers, and the vast majority of priests are not living their life very joyfully. And on the contrast, actually, most sexual abuse happens in married environments and families, right? And so I think what we have to do is really focus on helping priests live faithful lives, just like we have to help married people live more faithfully. We all have to live that.
Right.
And that's the call for priests, too.
Father Griffin, thank you so much for coming in today.
It's a joy to be with you. Thank you.
Still ahead on Faith Nation, go Tigers! National champions honored at the White House.
It's the new Superbook Bible app. It's packed with games, activities, and Superbook episodes that you can watch for free. Oh, no! There's trivia, a fun daily devotional, and answers to your Bible questions. Plus, an easy-to-understand Bible the whole family will enjoy. You can even create your own Superbook character. Ta-da! It's the new Superbook Bible app. Free downloads on iTunes, Google Play, and Amazon.
From Washington, D.C., uncompromising stories, interviews, and analysis from veteran journalists David Brody.
Escalating fight.
Jenna Browder.
Chose his words carefully.
Ben Kennedy.
Plan to join him.
And Amber Strong.
For impeachment grows a little bit louder.
Bringing you the political news that matters.
We get out and tell the story of the progress that we're making in this country.
Watch Faith Nation, weeknights at 6 on the CBN News Channel.
We will move the American embassy to the eternal capital of the Jewish people, Jerusalem.
As the nations rage, you can stand with Israel.
History is being written, and I want to be a part of it.
Call 1-800-700-7000 and get to life.
This is our nature as a country.
Discover the untold story of how Israeli volunteers are changing the world.
We consider it our duty to reach out and help others around the world.
For a gift of $10 or more, you can own the acclaimed CBN documentary To Life.
To treat a human, no matter what he is, which religion he have, which color he is, this is what I'm doing.
Support Israel in their time of need. Get to Life, now available on DVD. Call 1-800-700-7000 or log on to cbn.com.
And I wish that other people throughout the world could see this side of Israel.
Finally tonight, go Tigers. President Trump is honoring this year's college football champs.
Jenna, taking the party to the White House, the Louisiana State University Tigers joined the president in celebrating their victory over Clemson. President Trump regaled the players and guests with tales from the team's historic season, honoring one coach's adversity.
In the face of a heartbreaking tragedy, you rallied together behind offensive coordinator Steve Ensminger. Where's Steve? Steve, come on.
Ensminger's daughter-in-law, a sportscaster, died in a plane crash on her way to LSU's semifinal game in December. The president said Heisman-winning quarterback Joe Burrow was going to be rich. He also added that last year's national champions ate a lot of food and wondered aloud whether LSU's tough guy coach Ed Orgeron, or Coach O, ever cried as a baby. The team later joined the president for pictures in the Oval Office. Go Tigers, and that's your former home.
I used to live in Louisiana, in the northern part of the state, not Baton Rouge.
But still a Tigers fan.
In Monroe, Louisiana, yeah. Well, that is going to do it for Faith Nation.
Have a great weekend, everyone.